The first thing I remember about Easter is the light. Not the kind that comes from a bulb. Not the harsh white of a hospital hallway, or the humming fluorescent glare in an office building that never sleeps. I mean the soft honeyed light that slips through a kitchen window and lands on the table like a blessing you didn't earn. Like mercy. When you've spent most of your life waking before dawn, the world is usually dark when you meet it. Dark streets, dark buses, dark stairwells that smell like wet concrete and old secrets. But Easter always tried to meet me halfway. Even when I was so tired my bones felt hollow, Easter would slide a little brightness into my hands. A carton of eggs, a paper bag of sweet rolls, a church hat I kept wrapped in tissue like it was a crown. I'm in a nursing home now. Don't make that face. It's clean. It's safe. They bring my pills on time, and they call me Ms. Price the way people do when they're trying to show respect. Out the window, there's a small courtyard with a dogwood tree that blooms like it's showing off. Every spring, it throws white petals into the air, like confetti for the living. The people here talk about family. The way hungry people talk about food. My roommate keeps a framed photo of her son on the dresser and kisses it like it's a holy relic. The aides decorate the lobby with plastic eggs and paper bunnies. And somebody's always playing a gospel playlist that loops the same 3 songs until you can't tell if you're comforted or haunted. And me, I sit in my chair with my blanket on my knees, watching that dogwood. And I think about the Easter when my daughter stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as something she needed to hide. I used to tell myself my life was simple: work, pay bills, keep the lights on, keep food in the fridge, keep your child warm. I had a kind of faith back then, not loud faith, not the kind that makes a show of itself. Quiet faith, the kind that looks like standing up when you want to collapse. The kind that looks like taking a bus in the rain because your baby needs new shoes. The kind that looks like going to bed hungry so a child can eat a second helping. That was my Easter religion. I worked 3 jobs for years. I still remember the feeling of bleach under my nails. The way my hands stayed rough no matter how much lotion I rubbed in. I remember my knuckles swelling until rings wouldn't fit, and my wrists aching so bad I'd wake up with my fingers curled like claws. And still, I kept going. Because Vanessa had a mind like a bright blade. She was sharp, quick, hungry for more than what we had. When she said she wanted Howard, it sounded like she was naming a distant city made of gold. Howard. The way her tongue shaped that word, it wasn't just a school. It was a doorway out of our apartment, out of our neighborhood, out of the life I knew too well. I didn't flinch. I didn't laugh like it was impossible. I didn't ask her to settle for smaller. I got up earlier. I stayed out later. I learned to measure time in paychecks and tuition deadlines. I learned what it meant to carry a dream in your back like a sack of stones and still keep your head up. I told myself, if she goes there, if she walks across that stage, everything will be worth it. Every ache, every missed meal. Every night I fell asleep in my uniform and woke up with the smell of other people's mess on me. I was proud in the way only tired women can be proud. Not loud, not showy, just steady. A kind of pride that sits in your chest like a warm brick. And because I'd lived long enough to know that love without boundaries turns into a wound, I did one small thing, one practical thing, one thing that would later become the match in the dry grass. I had her sign a promissory note, not because I wanted her money. Lord knows I didn't. The paper wasn't about repayment. It was about respect, about weight, about remembering that behind the shiny future, there's always somebody's hands holding the ladder. She rolled her eyes and signed. That's what she did when she thought I was being old-fashioned. She signed like a child who believes a mother's rules are just noise. And I filed it away in my metal cabinet with the tax forms and insurance cards and the kind of documents that keep a poor woman's life from falling apart. Years moved like a train you can't stop. Vanessa changed the way people change when they step into rooms that were never built for them. At first it was small. A new voice. A new confidence. New words that sounded expensive, then it was bigger, a new distance. She stopped inviting me to things. She started meeting me somewhere in the middle, like my home was a stain that couldn't touch her new clothes. She began to talk about networking like it was a law of nature and not a choice people make when they're trying to climb away from where they came from. And I told myself, she's busy, she's growing, she's building. This is the life you wanted for her. Mothers lie to themselves the way people put blankets over broken windows. It doesn't fix the cold. It just makes it easier to pretend. By the time she graduated, I'd built a whole private church inside my chest where I worshipped her success. I thought that day would be my Easter, my resurrection, the day I could finally lay down the weight and say, I did it. I kept my promise. Spring came early that year. The air had that clean, bright smell it gets before the heat settles in. Dogwoods bloomed. The sky looked rinsed. And I sat in that auditorium with my best dress and my mother's pearls, feeling like I'd walked into somebody else's story. People around me smelled like perfume and soft money. Their shoes didn't look like they'd ever run for a bus. Their hands didn't look like they'd ever scrubbed a hospital floor at midnight, but when my daughter's name echoed through the room, I stood up like my bones were young again. I clapped until my palms stung. I cried without wiping my face because that was my child. My work. My miracle. After the ceremony, she hugged me quickly, like she was checking something off a list. And then she drifted away into a sea of strangers calling her brilliant. I still didn't understand. Not yet. The party was what broke the last piece of me that was still soft. A rooftop hotel. Champagne that cost more than my weekly groceries. Waiters in black vests, moving like quiet shadows. The city stretched out below us, like a glittering promise. Vanessa was radiant. Not just pretty. She moved through the room like she owned it. Like she'd been born into silken skyline and polite laughter. Like my life. My hands. My struggle, like all of that was just a rumor that didn't need to be. Repeated. And then there was him, Sterling, a man with a calm smile and eyes that looked like they'd never had to choose between rent and groceries. He held her like she was delicate, precious, something he'd paid a high price to win. When he shook my hand, his grip was warm and polite. When he told me he admired the sacrifices I'd made, I felt my chest loosen for one small second. Maybe she hadn't erased me. Maybe I was still part of this. That's what hope does. It shows you a drop of water and convinces you the whole river is coming. Then the toasts started. I can still hear the sound of glass against glass. That bright little clink, like something breaking gently. Sterling spoke. He talked about her mind, her grit, her future. He praised her the way wealthy men praise things they plan to keep. And then Vanessa stood up. She raised her flute like a queen blessing her subjects. She thanked his parents, his friends, her professors, her mentors. She smiled the kind of smile that looks beautiful until you realize there's no warmth behind it. And then she looked at me, and my heart, my poor, loyal heart lifted its face like a child waiting for a kiss. She said my name like it was a small thing, like it belonged in a footnote. She thanked me, in that sweet voice people use when they're talking about somebody they don't want to offend, but also don't want to claim. My mother always believed in me, she said, in her own way, as if my way was small, as if my way was scrubbing and sweating and sacrificing until my joints screamed. And her way was shining. She spoke of hard work like it was a story she'd read, not a life she'd lived. She turned my entire existence into a prop, something quaint, something humble, something she'd outgrown. And then she turned toward Sterling's father, Judge with the silver hair and the perfect posture, and she practically glowed. She spoke about finally having the kind of family she'd always dreamed of, finally, like I was practice, like I was the rough draft and they were the final copy. I sat there while applause floated around the room like confused birds. I sat there while my friend Janice squeezed my hand under the table so hard I could feel her anger buzzing through her skin. I sat there and felt the floor drop inside me, slowly, quietly, like an elevator losing its cables. After the toast, she came to me with her smile still on, but her eyes sharp. She told me she was moving to the head table with Sterling's family. Wedding planning, she whispered like it was a reason God himself would approve. And then she said, it's soft, controlled, like she was doing me a favor. I can't have you at the head table at the wedding. Remember the way the words landed. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy, like wet clothes dropped on a clean floor. The Maxwells have a certain standard, she said, and you wouldn't be comfortable. Then she laughed a little, a small, brittle laugh. It would be an embarrassment. Embarrassment. My child looked at my whole life and called it embarrassment, and something inside me went very still. Not rage, not tears. Still. Because when you've carried too much for too long, there comes a moment when your body stops reacting to
the way it used to. Like a switch flips. Like your blood decides it's done being hot. I nodded. I smiled. I let her walk away. And on the ride home, with Janice driving and the city lights smearing across the windshield, I realized something I should have understood years ago. Love doesn't protect you from being used. Sometimes love is the tool they use. That night, I didn't pray the way I used to. Not the desperate prayers. Not the pleading. I sat in my chair and watched the faint glow of the street lamp through the blinds, and I let the truth settle in my bones like cold rain. My daughter didn't just want a new life, she wanted a new origin story, one where she wasn't built from my sacrifice, one where she wasn't shaped by my struggle, one where she didn't have to say my name in rooms like that ever again. And in the quiet of that small apartment, I did what women like me do when their heart gets broken in a way that can't be repaired. I got practical. The next morning was Easter Sunday. Isn't that something? The world outside looked clean and newborn. People in pastel outfits walked toward churches like they were stepping into forgiveness. Little children carried baskets and ran across lawns like the earth had never hurt anyone. I watched them from my window with my coffee cooling in my hands, and I thought about resurrection. Not the storybook kind. Not the kind where everything is forgiven and everybody learns a lesson and the family hugs in a sunlit kitchen. I thought about the kind of resurrection nobody talks about. The kind where an old woman raises herself back up from the place they pushed her into. The kind where you look at your own life and decide you will not be buried while you're still breathing. I went to my filing cabinet. My fingers found the folder like they already knew the way. Tuition receipts, bank statements, every transfer, every payment, every proof of what my hands had done. And at the back, like a small weapon wrapped in paper, was that promissory note. Her signature was still bold, confident, careless. I held it and felt my chest tighten, not with grief, but with clarity. I hadn't written this note to punish her. I'd written it to teach her. But lessons don't always arrive on the day you plan. Sometimes they come when the student decides to disrespect the teacher. I sat at my little table where I used to dye Easter eggs with her when she was small. I remembered her hands stained blue and pink, her laughter loud enough to shake the walls. I remembered her running around in her church dress, white shoes scuffing the pavement, holding my hand like I was the whole world. And then I looked at the paper again, and I made a decision so calm it scared me. I would not scream. I would not beg for a seat at any table. I would simply return the truth to the people she was trying to impress. Because rich families understand one language better than they understand tears: liability. I wrote to Sterling the way I used to write to hospitals and landlord offices and utility companies when I needed something done. Clear, formal, unshakable. I mailed it the way you mail something that matters, so it can't be denied later. So somebody has to sign their name and admit they received it. Then I waited. On the fourth day, his voice came through my phone like a door opening. He listened. He asked questions. He sounded like a man trying to locate the edge of a lie. When he told me to come in, I wore my best coat. I wore my pearls. I carried my folder like it was scripture. His office smelled like clean money and polished wood. The city looked distant through the window, like a painting people pay to own. I laid out my proof, not for pity, for clarity. I watched his face change as he understood what those numbers meant, what those pay stubs meant, what my life had been. She told me she had a full scholarship, he said, and I heard the hurt in his voice before he tried to hide it. Your fiancé is brilliant, I told him, but brilliance doesn't erase debt, and it doesn't erase truth. When I told him what she said to me at the party, his jaw tightened like he was holding something back. When I slid the promissory note across the table, it landed with a soft sound that felt louder than thunder. He looked at her signature like it was a bruise. He thanked me. He didn't defend her. He didn't call me dramatic. He just got quiet. And when I walked out, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not victory, not revenge, relief, like I'd finally stopped carrying a secret that wasn't mine to carry. A week later, Sterling's father called me. A judge's voice is trained to sound steady. Even when disappointment is ripping through it like wind through broken glass. He apologized. He respected my sacrifice. And then, in a gentle way that still cut, he said something about the absence of character being a tragedy. A tragedy. I thought about Easter again, about how people love stories where the sinner learns and repents and becomes new. But real life doesn't always do that. Sometimes the sinner just gets angry that the mirror got held up. Vanessa showed up at my door like a storm. Her face looked different, not polished, not glowing, just raw. Her hair was messy, her clothes were expensive but thrown on like armor. She screamed like I'd stolen something from her. How could you go to him? I watched her, and I felt a quiet sadness settle over me. The kind that comes when you realize the person in front of you is not the child you raised. I didn't go to ruin you, I told her. I went to tell the truth. She called the note stupid. She called me bitter. She said I was jealous. Jealous! As if an old woman who worked herself into the ground could ever be jealous of the child she built her whole life around. She said Sterling was questioning everything. And for one moment, I almost saw fear on her face. Not fear of losing love, but fear of losing position. That's when I knew the house she was building wasn't made of affection. It was made of image. And image does not survive truth. When she left, she didn't hug me. She didn't ask me if I was okay. She didn't look at my hands. She slammed the door like she was slamming the past shut. 2 weeks later, the engagement ended. The newspaper called it mutual. I laughed once quietly into my tea. Mutual is what people call it when somebody with power decides they don't want your secret in their bloodline. I could have sued her immediately. I could have taken that promissory note to court and watched her face collapse under a judge's questions. But Easter was still sitting in my spirit. That strange season where people talk about resurrection and mercy in the same breath. So I didn't do the thing she expected. I didn't become a monster. I became a boundary. I set up repayment. Fair, manageable, unavoidable. Not to break her, just to remind her, month after month, that sacrifice is not invisible just because you refuse to look at it. And then, on the morning of Easter the next year, I did something I never told anyone until now. I took that promissory note out of its folder. I held it over the kitchen sink where I used to rinse dye off eggshells. I lit a match. The paper curled. The ink blackened. Her signature, so bold, so sure, turned into smoke. And as it burned, I didn't feel triumph. I felt release. Because the paper was never the real debt. The real debt was gratitude. The real debt was respect. And if she couldn't pay that, no court in the world could make her. Now, here in this nursing home, Easter comes again. The lobby fills with pastel paper eggs. The aides hand out little chocolate bunnies. Somebody plays a hymn that makes the older women close their eyes like they're touching something sacred. Outside, the dogwood blooms like it has never known winter. And I think about how life keeps offering rebirth, even to women the world tries to discard. I think about my daughter, somewhere out there, older now, maybe wiser, maybe not. I wonder if she ever looks at her hands and sees mine in them. I wonder if she ever feels ashamed, not of me, but of herself. And then I stop wondering. Because I've learned something quiet and hard, something that took me 60 years and a nursing home window and a dogwood tree to understand. You can pour your whole life into someone and still not control who they become. But you can always choose what you will allow. You can always choose where you will sit. And if they build a beautiful table and leave you off the guest list, you don't beg. You stand up. You take your dignity like it's a candle, and you walk into the light that was waiting for you all along.